good on posters.
In the background.
Rolling. Okay. Lobster. Thank you for doing an interview.
That's all right. Thanks for taking an interest in 38 years of novelty, whatever it is.
Look, I'm a big believer in general that artists are not the best audiences for their work. They can tell me how they made the record or what their motivations were, but they don't own the resonances of it once it's released to an audience. And that's actually what I'm more interested in. What does this record say about the time and place it was made? What does it have to say to us that's particular to the time and place we're in now? And I don't think the artist is best placed to do that. So I think it's completely appropriate that we talk about the meanings of Lobster's work, regardless of whether he'd agree with us. It's not that his opinion on his own work isn't of interest, of course it is, but it's not the final word, or at least I don't think it should be. Maybe it's not always completely intentional that he creates these kind of almost pitiable portraits of masculinity. But I think they're in there and they're fascinating.
The cult of Lobster, I mean, this Lobster Man guy, who is he? He's very prolific. I don't know how many albums he's got, but there's a lot. And he's just, you know, he's always doing stuff and always creating stuff, you know. Even if I didn't like his music, I really respect him completely. I just happen to also like his music.
I mean, God, who's that prolific? Apart from The Fall.
When he gets obsessed with something, he's got to completely know everything about it. And so, you know, every Captain Beefheart album, every Leonard Cohen album.
The landscape gardener who plays semi-pro, you know, or amateur competition football and does gigs on the weekend. It's an idiosyncratic but suburban everyday story. And whether he admits it to himself or whether he sort of thinks about it in this way, he's plotting this sort of Australian history of his lifetime from his late high school years of the early 80s to, you know, however long he keeps pushing it out. So far, we've gone about 40 years.
couple of mates. I can't really pick out who they are. Oh, and that's him with his guitar, learning to play the guitar that's our back room. Chris was the perfect baby. He just was quiet, just sit and watch the older children play, but then once he got on his feet, he never stopped. If you could never get a minute's peace, you'd be trying to read a book, he'd be at your shoulder saying, you know, how many things are there and how many days in the week, and just never stop talking. As much as he doesn't now, he loved TV commercials. He'd go to bed and the TV, because they were jingles, the TV, he'd be in bed and the TV advertisement would come on and he'd come running down the hall and watch it, and then he'd run back to bed. And he also had nightmares a lot too in the night. He used to wake up and say there were monkeys coming up the hall. That was one of his big things. Every night, and if he didn't get into your parents' bed quick enough, the monkeys would be further up the hall. So I think he used to draw those.
Houghton, Lavis, Healy. Lavis still has it.
Get up and play, bro, you imbecile.
Houghton, Anderson. 2 tackles to go. Pick up.
He used to play football in the backyard. He'd be the two teams, the commentator and the referee. He'd play all parts. You could hear him out there saying, so-and-so passed the ball to so-and-so, and you're on penalty, and he'd commentate it as well.
Right on the spot. That's the score.
Hi, I'm Gregory Lobb. I'm the eldest, and our sister was second, and Chris is the youngest. Chris was the active one of the two of us. He was always the one who wanted to be kicking a football or playing cricket or so forth, whereas I was probably more of a sit down and read a book or do something else sort of a person. He was very outgoing always and self-confident, and when he was younger he was a little bit of a tease. He would like to sort of get you going perhaps, and I think he might still be a bit like that. When I was really young, Dad was working a lot on the weekends, so I remember being excited if he was home on a Sunday. Dad used to take Chris and I a lot to North Sydney Oval. Dad was a very big Norths fan, which Chris has inherited. Ever since Chris was born up until when I was about 19, Chris and I shared the room. At night, before we would go to sleep, we'd say things like, name the such and such team, and we'd have to go through and name them all from the fullback down to the prop in the right order for that club, which we all knew off by heart. Specifically, he was able to act out the entire movie, The Poseidon Adventure, which he and one or two of his friends might actually start climbing around in the garage roof as if they were climbing through the bowels of the ship. Yeah, that was a very big thing, The Poseidon Adventure, for him. He loved it.
I'm not sure what year it came out, 72, but it wasn't until 74 it was on here, and it was on at the plaza in the city. And so we drove, it would have been do we have the Kingswood then? And dropped Viv, Greg and Cassie off at the movies, and then me and Ron went to Redfern Oval, watched Norths and Souths play a 14-all draw, then picked them up from after their movie and came back. They were saying how I would have loved it. It's about a boat, because I loved the water. It's about a ship and then survivors trying to get... And so they decided to take me again a couple of weeks later.
He's quite an archiver of his existence. And the songs are a bit like that.
Lobster's songs are quite unusual. They're really not like anyone else's. Mostly people's songs are about love, hate, despair, hard times. But Lobster will write about chairs, ornaments, injuries, nicknames, interesting characters, not your usual song topics.
From the first minute, you know, that had me. The boy walking up the stairs in the rain to get in to have a look at the bridge. And the colouring of the thing, the ship was greasy and old looking. And then, of course, I loved waves and things, so then the tidal wave.
Cut my hurricane. Split my lip pain.
Anyway, I got to about the last 10 minutes and I'm nudging Viv saying, does Gene Hackman live? And she goes, just wait, you know, watch till the end. I no, you have to tell me now, does Gene Hackman survive? And she goes, nearly, he nearly does. And I went, no,
Hey. You would have seen it, think it was bitter. She's got a sister that I'm getting out of here. Some people are givers and others are takers. If you're not bleeding, you're not working hard enough. Cut my hurricane. Cut my hurricane. Split my lip pain.
I remember getting my first year 7 report and I got 26 out of 26. I went, great, 100%. They went, no, you came 26th out of 26 people. I went, but I'm the school artist. Yeah, but that's the way that they're going to get you for not being a good student. They're going to make you come last in everything.
Would set you up. It's what you make it, and it's a bit of luck. An idea that's all your own.
So yeah, but then school needs a poster made for the Anzac Day. Who do they ask to do the artwork for it? The person that comes last in art. And, you know, at 54, I'm still designing posters. So there's your art curriculum.
An idea is an idea in itself. In an idea.
A lot of the charm of Lobsters is that he focuses on things that most people would feel were completely unremarkable. I think that Lobster is a quintessential Australian artist. He's so Australian. I think that his work tells us something about what it is to be Australian.
He's an observer. He's an anthropologist. He looks at things that no one else does in his own unique way. And he respects, I think, his thoughts as a teenager. And he doesn't dismiss them like we all do. He sort of sees something valuable in it, which I think is really rare.
He's never going to be as well known as Paul Kelly, okay? But in a different way, I think he serves a a similar artistic sort of purpose. He sort of translates the Australian experience into the form of song.
He just remembers everything clearly about the little things in life. That's what makes him interesting too.
Well, they started out building cubby houses. We would go down and find these perfect gum trees, and because Allambie was being built, so there was just wood bits and pieces. So we'd be carting stuff around all the time.
We used to have rock wars in the tree house down the bush.
That was our after-school thing. So after school, we'd be logging these things down, climbing up, and Smitty would be the architect and the builder of these cubby houses. But they weren't just knock-togethers, they were like full-on structures. So, you know, they were pretty high up in the trees, you know, down into the valleys. So then they become fortresses. But somehow, I don't know, it's part of this thing of the brandings and the punishing where the rock wall started.
We built a tree house in our bush. We used to throw rocks at each other. And when we went home, we used to swear.
So it might be quiet for half an hour and you're listening for twigs, and then all of a sudden the coloured shoes, like, there's one! And, you know, people up in the rock house, but someone over there, once they start throwing them, it's like a war, mate, exactly. So they'd start throwing their rocks from somewhere else at the cubby house. So they were full on, mate, they were breaking. There was a lot of blood and injuries and stitches and all sorts of things going on.
And Smitty would see someone like hiding behind a rock, but he was up in the tree and he could see. So he'd just get the pointiest, heaviest rock and go,
Oish! Like, it's functional. You'd rip your socket out. I mean, that's how it goes, you know. So it would hurt if a rock hit you, which it did.
And you'd hear, oh! And then someone would be off to Manly Hospital for stitches in the head.
And the boys, they want to prove their own importance by making themselves heard. That combination of new lung power, changed voices, and boundless energy is hard on the neighbors. They seem to spend hours in completely useless activity. They quarrel a lot, but the gang sticks together. There are no girls in it. They are passionately interested in sports, and hero worship from afar is common.
This is one of the, looks like the lads on their camping trip. They thought they were pretty big time, but they were just kids, really. They were mischievous and they tormented each other, and but they were very close. They stuck together.
Well, my name's Steve Peary, otherwise known as Bjorn. I've been known as Bjorn since probably the age of 13. I grew up in Frenchs Forest in Sydney and alongside Lobster in the next suburb, Allambie Heights. It was a pretty conservative, middle class sort of environment. Our friendships were always based around having fun. We sort of formed, there was about 12 guys, maybe 10 or 12 guys in our group, and we all had different personalities, and there was sort of splinter groups and different things, but we ended up finding surfing, and through that, Lobster and I found music together. I mean, there was a bit of a beginning for him. My music sort of career didn't go very far, and it was totally cool. That was what I chose to do at that time, but Lobster just had the gene to keep going very creatively, and it was great.
God, some of the stories he used to tell about his group of friends, they had this thing at lunchtime where they would sit along these two parallel benches and it would be someone's turn to be the guy on the ground who they all stamped on as hard as they could.
People had to crawl through and you could do whatever you wanted to them. So mostly punching, but there'd be kicks and like gouges and things like that.
And if it was your turn to be the guy on the ground getting pummeled by everyone else, your job was to laugh hysterically like they were tickling you.
But Smitty would always wait till the best opportunity. So our friend Goose went through, and he was a tough guy as well, but he went through, and when he made it through to the other side, he goes, "I don't care how many people punch me, but someone pinched me." And you looked at Smitty going, he just saw some skin and just...
Oh, you'd be bruised. I'm not talking. Yeah, they were full-on punches and dead legs and that. Part of the initiations of everybody. And if you didn't do it, you weren't part of the thing, you know, so everyone had to do it.
We'd have a dice. If we rolled the dice in the middle and your number came up, you'd have to get down in the middle while everyone else pounded you really hard on the back. You know, stupid things, but when you're 14 years of age, that's the kind of stuff you do.
And I never got that. This like violence and being hurt as part of bonding. And
they did torturous things to each other. They sort of had a lot of fun at the beach, you know, and surfing. And so it's that Northern Beaches sort of culture or Australiana.
This casual cruelty between young men, having a go at your best mates, being an elevated form of mateship, even to the point of them hurting themselves. One might say, I mean, I'm sure it's not, unique to Australia. It's probably a kind of a young man thing that you find elsewhere, but that is something he documents.
And we used to play this other game when we were on the Fair Star, ring pull torture. So you'd open your can of beer with remember the ring pull, you'd break it off, and then there's the tab, and you had to have your hand on the table and someone could get the tab and do something to hurt you. And so one at a time, so Smitty would get the tab thing and gouge just at the end of your fingernail. Oh, it's bleeding already. And go, oh, it's your turn. So but we weren't as cruel, so we'd go scratch, you know, and maybe a bit of blood. And then it'd be his turn again. And he'd do something even more. So you'd have your hands would be covered in blood.
Teenagers are cruel. They're brutal.
When he was going through high school in the 70s and 80s, I guess, you know, being a young man, a time when men were men, sort of thing. And, you know, as like you say, a keen observer and an artist, you know, that's where he's drawn his inspiration from.
Well, so much of it is about growing up on the Northern Beaches, isn't it? And the characters that he encountered, and some were his friends and some weren't, and you know, and playing footy and surfing and all those kind of things that you did as a kid. I've played shows with Lobster, and particularly in Tassie. He's massive in Tassie. They love him down there, and he's had people eating out of the palm of his hand, telling these stories, and then before the song as an introduction, and then playing them and giving real meaning to the characters and bringing them to life through these songs.
Sometimes young adolescents appear to enjoy utter uselessness. But this boundless energy can be directed into useful channels.
When did I write Buck Payton? Year 12 I wrote a song called Buck Payton because I sort of thought these people need to be put into these songs. So you just pick out someone who something bad's happened to or something that we think's funny, and then they're the subjects of the song. Not the cool ones. No songs about who was a great surfer or who gets all the girls at Beacon Hill Disco, but who had their teeth knocked out.
He has a physician's eye and a sniper's eye for the killer detail. And possibly in another era, in another country, in another class, in whatever, he would either be in an asylum or the poet laureate.
Whenever I've thought he's written a really serious song and I've asked Lobster about the story, I realise there's something quite either absurd or mischievous about the song that I hadn't been aware of.
His powers of observation are amazing, and that's what offends quite a few people. And you know what? He has a filter, but he chooses not to use it. And that's admirable, but sometimes it's mean.
He doesn't worry too much if he's going to offend someone. But that's good because he's just putting it out there as it is. There's no editing of his thoughts or his ideas. It's just that's what it is.
So Buck Payton gets to high school and feels that his role at school was to get in a fight every day.
I think maybe he got taunted a fair bit, maybe because of his teeth, because that's the Buck Payton, there's the teeth, and you know, he's a big strong head and teeth kind of like came out a little bit, so maybe he got taunted to the point where he didn't wear it anymore, you know. Probably more than me, you know. I've got the Kraut German thing, but I think that physical one was probably more prominent in everyone's face on a daily basis.
He knew he wouldn't win them, but that was how he was going to get through school. Was like, I'm always in fights. And then he's called Buck Payton because he's got a lot of teeth growing in all directions. And he lies down in the middle of the cricket pitch at cricket training and tells Malcolm Johnson to bowl over his head, and he wants to watch the ball go past him while he's lying looking up. And of course, Malcolm Johnson bowls a half tracker. Hits him right in the mouth. That's the teeth are gone, but he still gets called Buck.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will shortly be landing. Please ensure your cabin bag is safely stowed with armrests down and window blinds open.
Mentä kyllä Karjala lokkeekilo. Saka, laki.
My daughter went and lived in England for a while, and it's quite usual over there for people to mix more than they do here.
And so I think she was away for 12 months or something, but about 2 weeks after she got back, so I would have been 21, she would have been 23. She'd met this Nigerian guy, Adewale Fario. Whether it was in London or not, she was working as a nurse there. And he turned up. And you know, we lived in Lambie Heights. And there's also this Nigerian, looked like a Nigerian kind of prince, turned up on the doorstep.
And he was like quite well educated. He was an architect actually, but he was very out of place in Lambie Heights.
And then so my father just was all he was interested in, watching Norths, going to the races and working on a roof. So he didn't care. And it was almost like the rest of us like, what do we do here? Because you know, there's no spare rooms or what are we going to do with this bloke that's turned up? And so Smitty found out and he goes, can I come over and have a look? I go, yeah, you should see this guy. And and then who else came? Robbo. And they just came in, we want to see this African guy. Because I think there'd never been one in Lambie Heights by then, in 1986.
Ai yenu bingina makawajalo pondi ka bondo.
So they'd come around just like with a big smirk on the face, where is he? Just wait a sec, he'll come out. And I think he must have been staying in my sister's room on a little fold down. And then he'd come out and they were just like almost shocked. Oh, look. The family would be going, what should we do with him? And so Cassie would go off and do a night shift. And, you know, and then she'd actually just kind of almost like ignored him, and he had to like fend for himself then. And you're in Lambie Heights, there's nothing around there. There's bush. What's he going to do here? And then one day he came up to me and said,
Saka Lucky.
Oh.
Chris, where is Saka Lucky?
Never heard of that. Can't quite understand what you're saying.
Saka Lucky.
Oh, circular key.
Luma circular key.
Yeah, just bust to there and ferry. And I think he ended up finding a whole bunch of other Africans that lived maybe around Ashfield and then, you know, he went there.
But you never came back?
Was that the end? I don't know. Might have been the last time I saw him.
Tell us about some of the things that you have discussed about hating lobster.
He hates smokers. He hates smokers, smoking, and as a gardener, cigarette butts. Because I have to say also, what the fuck is with smokers? Like smoke, but can you put it in the bin? What the fuck is that? Like, that's a character note. That they fucking put it on the ground. You don't see people who eat apples chuck the thing on the ground. Character note. You're a fuckwit. Kids in pubs, they shouldn't be in pubs. Okay, there used to be two places you could go without kids. Work and the pub. And then suddenly they're in the fucking pub and I go to work and people are turning up with a child with Ebola going, we couldn't get daycare, so I had to bring him in. Can he sit with you, Joe? No, fuck off. So Lobster and I always talk about Laughing Clowns, Captain Beefheart, The Fall, and North Sydney Bears. And how men shouldn't wear boat shoes when they're nowhere near a fucking boat and with rolled off little cuffs and skinny jeans.
Never Never at the Hopeton, 8 until 11. And Tactics are playing at the Harold Park Hotel. They're playing with Mexicans Trapped in Rubble. I think that's
Poor
what it is.
name, yes, poor name.
From 8:30 until 11.
Mexicans started in retaliation that people were going to nightclubs. Jade's at DY had turned into a disco. People are queuing up and we're going, we don't want to go to these horrible places, queuing up, nightclub dancing. So we formed Mexicans to play angry music against nightclubs.
Northern Beaches was a pretty conservative place, and you know, like anywhere, the majority of people liked radio music, and that's okay. So we would play around at different places with our friends, and they'd just go, oh. And they'd make requests of all these top 40 songs, and none of them really liked it, but we didn't worry too much about that. We just liked playing it.
Trader of DY is very much about him crossing the bridge and moving away from that Northern Beaches area. He's crossed the bridge, but also this notion that he's playing at life. So the line in the song, when will your real life begin? Because your real life can only be coming back to the Northern Beaches, marrying a girl you went to high school with, you know, having a lawnmowers business, raising some kids, surfing on the weekend. That's life. And so that's what that song's about. That's about him breaking away from that, crossing the bridge, living in Newtown. And also that to those friends who'd stay behind, that not being a real life.
I'd like to get your theory on dogs, for example.
Growing up, there would maybe one person in your street had a dog, and it kind of would, you know, get out and it'd wander around to your place and you go, oh, hi lady, how are you? You know, and you knew where it lived, and it was like kind of communal dog. Maybe it'd wander up to the school, oh, lady's got out, you know, and everyone knew who it was. But it should have stopped there, you know. Not everybody has to have one. Think how much easier life would be without having to feed at racehorses and pick up shit every day. Because that's your life. For 10 to 15 years, that's what you're going to be doing, just so you can be seen parading this useless heap of fur around the street. People buy a dog that looks like them in the first place, I'm not quite sure, or they become the dog themselves. Also, that whole thing about having a dog that represents you. So, who has a bull terrier? You know, the person that wants to be a bull terrier. So, I can't do it myself. So, with this, we are a bull terrier. Pathetic.
Chris also talked to me about the profound effect that it had exposing him to classical music and how it was you who brought him to this. Is that right?
Well, I guess so. So by this point we were a couple and we'd started going off and, you know, to the Sydney Symphony Orchestra, and a couple of concerts really stick in my mind. So one was seeing them do Shostakovich's Fifth Symphony and the conductor himself being airborne on more than one occasion. And Chris Lobb being just on the edge of his seat, like just absolutely transfixed by this.
I felt myself almost conducting. We were sitting quite close and I knew what instruments to bring in. I'd studied it that much.
I really enjoyed that concert series because he was discovering the music. And it was so, I don't know, it just really seemed to get into him. And like I said, he would be on the edge of his seat, you know.
So I just dedicated myself to listening to it over and over, and I still got no idea how they write those symphonies. Because I think Shostakovich just gets a big, thick music book and a pen, and he just thinks, and then he starts in this book, no piano or just it's all in the head.
And so me having been a bit like, as a kid, taken to concerts, falling asleep, you know, to watch someone hearing this music for the first time and seeing it performed live and being so affected by it, it almost made me appreciate it more.
The Niggler is so concise. It's not long, you know, it's 15 to 20 minutes, but there's just not a wasted second on that thing, you know, it's beautiful.
He was going to write a symphony and it was going to be called The Niggler. I mean, this whole crazy thing of like, oh yeah, we're going to be Russian peasants in a backyard in Erskineville making sounds with trowels and shovels and like, yeah. I think no one but Chris Lobb could have thought that up.
Didn't muck around with recording, we just did 1 or 2 takes. Every time we recorded it was 1 or 2 takes. There was no, and that was okay. If there were imperfections, that was fine because he wasn't aiming for perfection. He wasn't gonna like redo things and pick pieces out of here because he wanted to present it as it was with all our human faults. You make mistakes, that happens. And you just keep going. And if there wasn't too serious in the recording side of things, you didn't worry about it. And it became part of it.
Well, he was really into Shostakovich and Dostoevsky, and they really like had this sort of, it was just like this person that was this kind of, you know, strange Australian man in a West, just sort of fascinated by this Russian culture.
Sadness in hard labour. You're just doing this mundane, physical, depressing work that someone has to do. And he just gave a soundtrack to that.
Notions of the quotidian then, the everyday. How you see that notion playing out in Lobster's music?
He writes a fair bit about food and insects, and they're kind of, it's almost a childlike thing that rather than consider these loftier ideas, it's like, let's play in the dirt. Let's write a song about meat pie, finch, seagull, peas, stick insect, a fly landed on my lip, injuries rife, where he gets a sore throat from yelling at the football on a Sunday afternoon. They're little miniatures. It's almost like any phrase that comes into Lobster's head can become a song. There's no filter between the everyday life and what can make it into a song.
He's through.
For me, that song is so Aussie. It's just really Australian without being your Paul Kelly typical Aussie song, because it's what happens at a barbecue.
We're all at a party on Narrabeen Beach, one of the houses that faces the beach. It was Smitty's wife, Margaret. She lived there when they were early in their relationship. And there's all of us guys with a trade, so there's probably 6 or 7 carpenters. And so then it starts to rain. And so Margaret says to Smitty, I told you to put a tarp up. And he goes, look, it's all right, because he was doing the barbecue. No, it's all right, it'll blow over. Obviously, we didn't care. But the one guy there that wasn't a tradesman goes, I'll do it.
You get blokes just being blokes and not actually helping where they can. Someone trying to do the good deed of fixing the tarp and it turning to disaster.
So he gets up on this old salt-blasted, corrugated fibro roof. He's through, and the roof is falling in. And he goes crashing through. I can see his shoe, and he's lost a fair bit of skin. From underneath, we just saw a leg dangling, blood, and then the girl screaming, he's through!
He seems to like the absurdity of a situation, I think. Like everyone's looking at one aspect, but Lobster will be looking at it from a completely different angle.
He's got all these songs that, you know, he's watched somebody go through, and they've been injured doing something. And he writes about it in a way that's compassionate but also dispassionate as well.
The fibro just all crashed through, landed on his girlfriend, and Tracy or whatever her name was. So she's injured, he's injured, and they had a puppy, a blue cattle dog. Then it ran on the road and got run over. But everyone's just looking up going, we obviously walked in the middle of the sheet without walking on the battens, you know. So to us it was obvious because we've worked on roofs. why didn't you guys help him? We were too busy thinking it was really funny. Mass panic, except for Smitty, who was laughing. The person that could have done the job. Because Smitty came up to me and later went, did you hear that? People were saying he's through. That was all that he thought, that's all he cared about. He's through.
Okay, so oh, this is horrible. This is an awful story, but it's really good though. He doesn't have sympathy for anything, but he has a consideration of what happens. Why I would say it was like a bit of an empathy sort of thing, because it's empathetic approach. Even though it's sometimes very cruel.
The Warriewood jump? Have you ever jumped off the Warriewood? Did you ever go and have a look at it?
Yeah, I've seen it. Yeah, I've seen people do it. I wouldn't do it.
Ross Lynch was a little bit of a character, wiry, kind of thin dude, had a lot of ribs on him. And he was a good surfer too, mind you. But it's all about the jump, and then it's all about the way you hit the water.
When there was no surf at DY and there was 20 of us 18-year-olds, what are we going to do? There's no surf. So there was certain jumps on the northern beaches. There was Collins Flat at Manly that was just 30 feet. The duck ponds at Bayview, where it was like a creek and you could jump into this muddy pool, not this dirty pool of water. You didn't know how deep it was or what logs were submerged. Or there was Warriewood, was the big one. It was 70 feet. And it was off the headland at Warriewood into the ocean, and you'd jump when there was a bit of a swell, so the water was deeper.
When you hit the water, there's a tunnel that goes underneath the rocks and comes up and just surges up and lifts you up onto a platform. Then you've got to climb back up ropes and chains all the way back up the top.
The best thing to do was just to go, right, 70 foot, I'm going to be in the air for 3 or 4 seconds. Just do it, because if you start looking over the edge, the fear will get you. And you know, your friends go, you're scared. No, I'm not.
It's a transparent song about bullying. That's what it's about. You know, it's about this person being cajoled into doing themselves a serious injury rather than be unpopular with their peer group. But, you know, on the surface, it's about this stupid incident of injury.
You know, you got to do it to be part of the gang, the crew. If you haven't done it, you're weak and nothing. You know, Ross Lynch, he had to do it too. You know? So, we all had to do it.
Jump, Lynch, you coward, jump, or we'll tell everyone that you were petrified.
We all had to come up with courage. A man's got to do what a man's got to do. That's what I remember saying the first time I jumped off there.
Ross Lynch had just got his first job as a technician, and he's going, oh, I don't know about this. Come on, Ross, we've all done it.
3 cracked ribs later and your first week's pay. Are you glad you landed this way?
You've got to be focused. You've got to want to land properly and be part of it. But if you're only doing it half-heartedly or sheepishly and that, you're going to land the wrong way, you're going to hurt yourself. That's what happened to Ross.
He was leaning by the time he hit the water, and he's skinny guy, and the water just punched up through the rib cage, and he broke 3 ribs, the impact of the water.
The worst thing you could have done was to pause and take deep breaths. You just got to launch yourself and hope that it all soon ends.
3 cracked ribs later and your first week's pay. Are you glad you landed this way?
Geez, we weren't very nice to each other when we were kids, weren't we? And that's what kids can be. Kids can be pretty cruel.
Oh, okay, this is my thing about Lobster. I think that song, like, he kind of eviscerates himself more than anyone else because he's putting himself out as a torturer.
I think there's an apology in that song. There's an apology, but it's not going to stop us calling you ribs.
And his first pay was like, you know, $220, first week's pay, and that's what he had to pay for to get his ribs fixed. So that's the song. 3 cracked ribs later in your first week's pay.
The old writer is like the south stain. You can just see it off the headland. Gurgling now, the last glimpses of green and yellow paint. There goes the old girl, the faulty equipment peeling paint, an oil leaks, an inky current as the sinking pen disappears. The aging amateur, the south stain, or was it the ferry DY? The groaning of the decks, the creaking of the boards, as it gurgles down, the last glimpse as the sinking pen disappears.
Red fellow bacon in the heat.
So Johnny Flame was he was the son of the Salvation Army man at DY, and he got put in Beacon Hill High School.
Johnny became part of the group through more myself because I was in, Rod Smitty and I were in science with Johnny, and you know, we'd say, yeah, you're a good fella. We couldn't help but like him. He was a nice guy. He had red hair and white skin. He was susceptible to everything that the beach offered in that regard.
So they said, oh, you should come surfing with us down at DY. Oh, yeah, okay.
I don't know if he ever got into surfing, but he started to come down the beach with us, and
they took him out in quite big surf at DY. They all paddled out the back, and there's Johnny just thrashing around. And of course, he never makes it out the back. So then he gets washed back into shore and just waits for his friends to come in. But both can go surfing for 2 hours, you know, so.
Red fellow bacon in the heat. Blistering up his puffing pink feet. Salt water never tasted this sweet. Red fellow bacon in the heat.
Water up the nose, water in the lungs. Oh, I'm just going to have a sleep. So he fell asleep, and he was asleep for hours. And of course, Smitty walked past me and there's Johnny, he's asleep.
like, I don't know, is it lobster? I'm going to say it was lobster. It could have been Smitty, but we found a little
dead rock cod, the ugliest fish in the world.
From my memory, got placed on.
Put it on Johnny's chest, and then they all went home and left Johnny asleep.
Pretty much that was the way it went down. Johnny had a dead fish on him.
So then he got sunstroke, and then like he would have woken up at like 4 o'clock in the afternoon, sunburnt. And of course there's this stinking fish on him. So he's gone, oh, thrown that off, but then he's white.
And a dead fish tattoo for a couple of weeks there when he got red. He was beetroot red, like completely scalded, but he had the outline of a fish on his body. So that's my memory of that particular incident, but I don't think Johnny ever came back down the beach with us again.
The last day we saw Johnny was on the beach that day getting sunburned. And then that was it, we never saw him again.
Like, that's pretty much broke his spirit, and I felt for him. You know, I have that big compassionate side, bring him in, but you know, once you're in the group mentality, it's every man for himself. You know, because we're all susceptible at some level.
Blistering up his puffing pink feet. Salt water never tasted this sweet. Red fellow bacon in the heat. We left a dead fish on Johnny. The silly boy was burned as a bastard. Red Johnny! Red blistering Johnny! He'll be peeling and itching after the pain, with the imprint of a fish on Johnny's brain.
Yeah, I think as far as the Popona story...
Do you have a Logie?
Oh, no, but I'm sure to get one this year. The big one, the big Logie.
Terrible! Sounds like a disease!
When Kingswood Country came on, I'm probably thinking around year 7, so 1977 or 78. But it was Thursday night, half-hour comedy, and then into the Dukes of Hazzard. You'd get to school the next day, and who watched Dukes of Hazzard? Who watched Kingswood Country? And you'd start rattling off all of Ted Bullpitt's comments from that show because you'd heard your father and your grandfather say the same things, and he became our hero, Ted Bullpitt.
Give me your keys. The Kingswood? You're not taking the Kingswood. I just missed a sheen the roof rack. No, you're not taking the Kingswood anywhere. You hit things.
I don't.
You do. Look at that purple wog wagon of yours. Dings all over it. Not like me. 30 years of motoring and not one prang.
What about the prangs you've caused?
Listen, mate. I'm the safest driver in Australia, probably the world.
How come?
I drive on Shell.
What's Shell got to do with it?
It's a safe petrol, not like that lair-rising Amoco jungle juice that you drive.
I'm Alex Marinos and was born in Wagga Wagga and moved to Sydney as a teenager and started acting about 50 years ago now. I came from a Greek family, so stereotypically we had a cafe in Wagga. It wasn't called the Parthenon or the Acropolis or the Paragon or any of those. It was very mundane. It was the Bridge. In the cafe, you know, when, you know, usually later at night after the guys had had a few drinks and stuff like that, and the occasional rowdy drunk would come in, and it was very much about go back to where you came from. And I knew that when we were being called Dago, it wasn't a good thing to be, you know, and as I said, you know, speaking Greek publicly was, you know, there was lots of, why don't you speak English a Dago?
Great.
Hello, Mrs. B.
And a big coo-ee to you too, Bruno.
Thanks, Mrs. B. I needed that.
Oh, what have you got in all those cans of beer?
Beer?
For drinking?
Yeah.
Oh, heavens. You're becoming more naturalised every day.
Judy was the heart of the show. I mean, not dismiss Ross in any way, but Judy provided the kind of centre that we could all, you know, in her own eccentric way and make that, because that was an impossible character to make work. The rest of us were kind of pretty straightforward in terms of, and she was the one who had all the internal contradictions, and yet she was the one that made it work.
He wants to deliver a telegram.
Well, take it from him.
Oh, Ted.
What?
He wants a tip.
Well, give him a tip.
Oh, Look both ways before you cross the road.
G'day, Dad.
You know, I think Ted did represent that kind of older Australian who was having difficulty dealing with the way that Australia was changing so rapidly. That all of the things that Ted had held sacred and sacrosanct were being undermined.
There's nothing wrong with me, mate. I'm Australian. Not like you bloody migrants. You're coming out here, taking our jobs, perving on our women, breathing our sunshine. Why don't you go back to your own country?
Listen, for the last time, I'm an Australian. I was born here.
Where?
Wagga.
That'd be right.
If you're like that, intolerant, and your daughter's going to find someone who's really against the way you feel just to irritate you, the father has to accept an ethnic into the house when he'd never planned to have, you know. You always probably think your son-in-law is going to be a builder or someone that can help you out.
So all of the things that Ted held fixed in his firmament were being undermined. And for anyone, that's difficult to cope with. And so his coping mechanism was to lash out.
You haven't changed a bit. You know, the trouble with you, Ted, is you've never even really lived.
Of course I've lived. I've got a Kingswood.
There's more to life than a Kingswood.
Watch it, mate.
That's not uncommon through the history of drama, is the everyman who was put upon by the external forces. You know, that's quite a trope that has, you know, has existed for a long while.
G'day, Teddles.
Bloody what?
This afterwards, but how did it feel to see it sort of be called every week a bloody walk on TV?
Oh, I mean, I struggled to deal with that, to be honest. You know, I guess at the time I was able to reconcile it by saying, well, what that's really doing is it's actually pointing up his intolerance, and that's something that we should criticise rather than... But I could tell that the audience also, you know, laughed at it and thought it was funny.
Did that audience laughter that you detected was with Ted, did that make you feel uncomfortable with it?
Oh, yeah, a little bit. Yes, it did. I did feel uncomfortable about that. But then once again I thought, well, hang on, I just need to just be able to work out what's going on here, and what's going on is that we are a changing society. People are having difficulty coming to that change. Is it a good thing to be calling them Dagos, Wogs, whatever, Abos? You know, is that kind of language, what does that do to someone's personality? Is that a good thing to happen or not? Is that the kind of thing we want to pass on to our kids? Is that something we want to perpetuate within our society? So it did raise those questions, and that kind of discussion is healthy.
I'm curious, do you think that there was something of a tragic nature about Ted as well in that regard?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think, once again, I think there are two things operating. I think to be able to portray a character that has that kind of limitation and yet has an essential underpinning humanity about it, I think that's what Ross brought to it. And I think that's what... without that, we wouldn't care about Ted. You know, and I did subsequently work with somebody who was very like Ted in terms of espousing those philosophies without that underpinning humanity, and he was an absolutely horrendous human being.
They say the Parramatta Eels can't attack. They attacked today. Glover scored a fine one, and then... I can't work under these...
On the present figures, Labour is ahead.
Hey, did you hear that?
Super.
New government before midnight. I hear you're very creative.
Thank you. You're interested in art?
Oh, very much, yes. I do a lot of photography.
Where's senior photographer?
So,
I think after 30, you lose interest in politics. I think it's for the young. I think old people vote terribly because they're scared, and I'd rather start at 18 and then the cut-off date 30 would be my way of doing it, because that's when you're in your prime. Whatever they choose, that's what you get. People say, no, they'll get it wrong and they'll ruin it. I went, but they're ruining them for themselves. It's not going the other way. Yeah. So, but who would say to me, no, they can't keep the cut-off at 30? Who would say that to you? Someone who's panicking about something, that they own. That's the way I look at it. But yeah, I gave up on the Don's Party dream, probably in my 30s.
So you say that Tup was probably more of a father figure than Ron in some respects? Would that be a fair?
I think your grandfather is, because he's your hero and you can do no wrong. Whereas with your father, you can't do anything right.
As a child I named you Tuppy Grim. I cartooned you while you slept. You kept every drawing I ever did, even the stupid ones in pen. Plotted our walk to Victoria, but settled on a Lambie bush.
He was a bit of an unusual person. He had to leave school early because he's with a depression, and he went into the Air Force during the war.
Do you think that Tup had quite an influence upon?
Oh, definitely, particularly with his imagination, because Dad used to make people up, and they'd talk about people that didn't exist, football teams that didn't exist, and they'd do drawings together, and Chris idolised him.
In some ways, your grandfather was your first close person, because obviously my father worked 6 days a week and didn't see a lot of him. And he was out building, then getting work in the pub. That's where everyone got their work in the 60s and 70s. And then they get home late at night and want to sleep. Your grandfather's where you go in the morning or, on the weekends to mind you and all that. So I think, I have more memories of hanging out with Tup than my own father.
Put so many stories into Chris's head. The teachers at school used to say, I'm sick of hearing about Chris's grandfather. He'd say, my grandfather and I are going to walk to Melbourne. The teacher saying, you can't walk to Melbourne. He said, yes, we can. My grandfather said we can.
But I expected walking to Melbourne was going to be like walking through the bush for a month at it, not down any highways or anything. He sort of made it sound like it was going to be this walk through like a bush track all the way to Melbourne. Just a form of kind of keeping me to dream, He loved the way I was a daydreamer. Tup's things was he could draw. We drew together, and he turned me into like a person that would sketch, and his were always so much better than mine. But then again, you'd go back a month later and he kept everything I did. He'd even like I'd draw a mountain and a sea and a boat, he'd keep it and he'd treasure it, or it'd be up on his wall in his bedroom. You learn a lot more off your grandfather because he's got more time to spend with you, He's not as tired as your father is because he's working so much.
But that father-son relationship is an interesting one, because you worked with your father too, didn't you?
Yeah, I got an apprenticeship with him when I was 21, because the horticulture was sort of in the recession. Horticulture, no one needed us, so he put me on as a carpenter, and I actually did about 7 years, and learned a lot. But once again, no compliments, all just criticism. But I still enjoyed my time. You know, I learned a lot. He taught me a lot of good stuff. But I was working with other builders. They all thought I was really good. Only your father says, he's no good.
Same old lack of talent. And your old maid disappointment is with you all the way.
Your father was always, you had to have a little bit of fear that you're going to get in trouble or hit or, you know. And I think even at last, so I was 30 when my father died, but you still kind of have that, your father sort of was someone that you could never impress. Because they've got to be hard. I mean, they're not like today's wet fathers, carrying the child like that. You know, my father was either at the pub, at the races or at North Sydney Oval. He was never pushing a pram or carrying you in a sack. As soon as the child doesn't fear the father and doesn't respect the father as being more important than him, or that you may as well give up.
Writing the right way has always given me cramps. Writing like everyone else, well, there should not be rules.
For a whole year, he had his book upside down. History for a whole year in year 10. Wrote every single thing upside down. The first lesson from the first page to the end of the year. So I'd be checking, seriously. No, the whole year, mate, I can tell you, because other guys were checking too. Who does that?
Have smoke coming out of them. Biggest head I ever saw belonged to elbow bone radish. I'm not quite sure what he'd done or why we had to punish him with punches and dropping elbows. Do you ever fully recover?
But hang on, who was he asking that to? Himself or the victim?
He had a bit of a triangle head. That's where he got the carrot sort of thing. But he was always being tormented by Lobster and Smitty. I was not so much a tormentor, I don't know why. But those guys were more than me.
His dot pointing, what they did to that person. His dot pointing, they went, there's the weaker boy. That's what they're doing to them. And he's admitting his sins.
You can't take any artist's work as autobiography, but it's like Lobster Man, through everything he does, is creating a kind of distorted biography.
You ever turn up every day just to have someone steal your dream? Your head was buried in a ball, circle of tacklers closing in with punches and dropping elbows. Do you ever fully recover?
Radish, right, so he was a Czech, and he came to our school in kindergarten, and very, not standoffish, but he didn't get involved, and he had this big round face, and When we're having our birthdays in October in kindergarten, so 1970, my 6th birthday party, having running races out the backyard and getting prizes. There was like a lucky dip. And Radish beat Smitty in a running race, so Smitty punched him in the guts. And then his father had to come round and take him home. If there was a game of football on, he'd get tackled, he'd get buried in the ground. He was just one of those guys that he always got punished. And elbow bone was when we'd call an elbow bone elbowing someone in the spine. And so they'd collapse on the ground. He'd go around in groups elbowing people. So he copped his, fair share of those as well. So then the song Elbow Bone Radish, of course his last name ended in Radish, because Radavich. I'm saying, well, you're probably really successful now and we're out of your hair, and us guys are probably still running around tackling each other and hurting each other, but you've made it, You've probably, because you're smart, you're probably successful now, and you survived. So I hope you feel all right about it. Not much, no guilt. Just like these nerdier guys had to put up with the bashings.
War it all finished, earning and deserving more. But we have the stories for the clever ones to ignore. We have the stories. We have the stories. We have the stories. And the biggest head I ever saw. The biggest head I ever saw. Belong to. We have the story. We have the story. Elbow bone radish. And the biggest head I ever saw. The biggest head I ever saw. Belong to. Belong to. We have the story. We have the story. We have a story. We have a story.
Having watched him for such a long time over various incarnations with his bands, is he works out a particular style and he gets really good at it. Once he's really good at it, he'll drop it, start again with something completely new and fresh. So he gets a new perspective. I think he just thinks there's so much to see and write about that he sort of creates his musical group around him to get to a certain point where he's got as much as he can out of that, and he'll just be doing the same thing. So he starts afresh. It's almost his theory about always wanting to be the support band. When he gets to the point he might be the headline, nah, start again. So you can be the support band again.
really mundane things, but beautiful and interesting, like onion weed and the sadness of onion weed, but kind of, and the anguish of it. But like quite, you wouldn't really sort of write a song about that, really, would you? But you do. He does it very well. There's a lot of sadness of change, I think, and sort of these relentless human things.
He's got the ability to inspire existential thought without actually being existential. You know? Just writing about mundane, everyday things. But it's probably the music that he writes that gives it that gravitas.
And it affects your thinking, it interrupts what you're doing. As soon as you're able to close your eyes, you acknowledge the onion weed's dominance, and I keep going, I keep on.
He may well, in time, become appreciated as, you know, the prince of the North Shore. You know, he could be it. I mean, he's got that much material.
Alive digging out onion weed, sifting the bulbs from the soil. Alive digging out onion weed, sifting the bulbs from the soil. I keep going. I keep going. I keep going. I keep going. Alive digging out onion weed. I keep going. Alive digging out onion weed. I keep
But aren't you just an older man still digging out onion weed?
I dug out a huge one this week. You wouldn't believe it. I actually went and got a bigger shovel and went, this is the biggest onion weed I've ever seen. It was in, like, there was 4 inches of mulch and this thing had a flower, and I've dug a huge hole, pulled out in one and gone, wow, that's a classic. Wish I'd taken a photo of it.
Clock radio.
Voices in the night, clock radio 312, clock radio, clock radio. What's that station? Clock radio 312, clock radio, clock radio. If there was any louder, you get complaints. If you heard what I heard, you might understand.
Clock radio.
any louder, you get complaints. If you heard what I heard, you might understand.
Clock radio.
The clock radio